on thread. Before I go any further, let's get some stuff plugged in to get these wires all neatened up. If I had a CPU, I would have that installed. Still out of stock, but I don't, so I'm just going to put the water block on there as a placeholder so I can measure out the tubing and cut everything to length. Here's the contents of the water block box. We've got these pegs, which will be mounting the water block onto the motherboard, some springs for tension, lots and lots of washers, if I can find one, metal, plastic, and the water block itself. That's actually a cover. The pegs go through those holes in the corners, and that inspires confidence. Falling apart. Solid copper water block with the inlet and outlet. I think the inlet is marked. There it is. So it does have a specific direction the water has to flow for best effect. Shiny on the bottom with some tape. So I gotta pull that off before mounting it. I have 4 screws around the sockets to take out. They're holding a back plate on the back side. And that back plate will be used to secure the water block. So I can't let that back plate go anywhere. Since it's just a placeholder, I'm putting only the plate on. Move the light over the case. It's better lighting and it's out of the way. My fittings are going in next. I'll be attaching them to all the hard points, like the radiator, reservoir, and pump, as well as the case. They're all chrome plated, so they have that nice black metallic finish. The internals are brass, so they're compatible with the copper of the radiator and water block. They're almost all, made by EK water blocks, and this is the fill port, so it goes in to a handy hole there on the top of the case. And I'll be holding it in place with this collar, snagging it up there. There's no room for my hands behind this reservoir. I'm plugging the inlet to the pump because it also receives water from the reservoir above it. This loop is not going to be fancy, so don't need to when that's active. I was looking at how some of this routing is going to go, and it's just not going to work for filling. For instance, you have the fill port behind. My hand is where the bottom of the fill port is. This is the entry point into the reservoir, so that's kind of a difference of height which just doesn't work. So that fill port in the back is just going to have to not be used. I'll be attaching a hose which I can detach as needed. Detach when I'm done filling. The water, and I got a cap I can put on the top, so that's one modification. I found another routing issue between the radiator and the reservoir. I put these fittings here to see kind of what the angle was, and the distance between them is short enough that the hose becomes kind of oval. Not quite kinking, but it is a restriction for the water flow. It is rubber and fairly thick walled, so I don't want any restriction any more than I already have. You might think, well, just take off one of these guys. Well, I do that. That was my original idea. Just putting in these 45s. Come on. There we go. Longer run, however, the roof of the case gets in the way, and it's actually even more of a kink as the hose hits the top of the case. So I'm going to have to get myself a 90-degree fitting. I don't have any 90 degrees. I didn't think I was going to need any. So that will be a few days while I wait on that. I can, however, at least hose up the rest of the computer. Got the water block assembled. Still waiting. So now I can more accurately measure this distance. Got to measure the base of each fitting. Get this finger where it needs to be. And try not to take off my fingertip. No. Gotta go around the back. There's no room for my hands up here. Hand. There's one hand up here. I can't even get my first finger where it needs to be, so measure it off. Ring finger. Where'd the cutter go? Oh shit, it's really sharp. Still managed to smooth cut. I'm just eyeballing a comfortable length here for the fill and drain hose. Yeah, missed my thumb that time. Each length of hose has to have a fitting on either end. Now the problem with this hose is that you can see it is very thick-walled, and the space between the throat and the ring of the fitting is a whole lot less than that wall. Not only that, the inner diameter here, the throat, is a lot larger than the inner diameter of the hose. This is engine hose rubber, so it is flexible enough to be able to squeeze, but it's not flexible enough to stretch over that throat. I'll be boiling the end of it in water, and that'll make it soft enough to be able to slide over the throat, and this ring will be able to clamp on to hold it in place. There we go. More like 5 minutes of boiling. Now, let's get this guy on. Tight. Where's the one? There we go. We got ourselves one fitting. It's on snug. As the rubber cools, it will become firmer, and that is not going to be coming off. Should put the collar on first, otherwise we won't get the fitting to be secured. Caps on both ends, ready for installation. Take this off for a moment. Thread this onto the water block. That right angled part has arrived. With some hand magic and a change in perspective, I had to take the top off the case again to get my hand back here. But there's the short length of hose with a right angled elbow connecting to the top of the reservoir. So with the loop completed, I've got the pump here running fluid into the water block, which then runs to the gigantic radiator in the front here, along this hose into the reservoir and back into the pump. Time to fill it. Okay, pulling the stopper here on my fill port. If I would have it open as well. This hose is my drain hose, but I am having it double as my fill hose as well. That way I can fill the computer with having the fill business end of the fill port here away from the case, because I just don't trust myself. It would help if I had my funnel. I've got blind guy aim, so I don't want this all over the countertop. Let's see how full that reservoir is. Okay, I have water. The leaks seem to be from the fill hose connection. I just didn't tighten it enough, so rather than deal with that, I just put the funnel directly into the fill port there. I have a jumper connected to the power supply with a handy dandy button attached to the jumper to allow me to control the power supply. So at this point, I'm going to run the pump and watch that water go down. And as it gets close to the bottom there, I stopped it too soon. I stop it and then I fill it to put more fluid in until it is completely filled. Oh, there we go. We have the loop putting water back into the reservoir. It just needs to finish filling it up to get it filled at the top of the reservoir, and then I'll just let it run, stopping on occasion to tilt the case back and forth to move the bubbles into the reservoir and then out the top through that fill port. It'll probably take about a day, I guess, I've heard. So tomorrow I will be installing the CPU and getting all the electrical and signal cables routed and tidied up, and install Windows and get this thing in working order. Finally! Wow, see how opaque that fluid is? All this in the reservoir is supposed to be clear. So that's a lot of micro bubbles, which just need to be worked out over the next couple of hours. You can see the fluid is still cloudy from micro bubbles, but less than an hour later it is much quieter. Those paper towels there in the frame are just a precaution to catch any leaks that might not be obvious in the first hour or two of the pump running. Working those bubbles through the radiator. Guess this is kind of the computer equivalent of burping a baby. After a few hours of having the pump running, I found two problems. One was leaking from most of the seals, so I am tightening about a quarter turn past finger tightening. It seems that finger tightening is not good enough, so what I read was wrong. I'm using a towel here to prevent the chrome from being scuffed up by those jaws. So now that should no longer leak. I also found that the routing I did with the hose was not good. There was a lot of air in the system even after a few hours. Not just micro bubbles, but there was a pocket of air which would not budge no matter how I tilted the computer case. So it was just a matter of the reservoir not being able to be filled all the way to the top to make sure there was no air in the loop. So I'm routing the tubing, if I can find it over here, tubing which was going from radiator to reservoir into the top of the reservoir. This will be going instead down the side of the reservoir directly back into the pump, and the reservoir can then actually be completely topped off and air will no longer be an issue. Got my thermal grizzly. Okay. Is the tip needs to be punctured or something? Where's the tip? You. Oh. Plastic. Plastic collar, which is just holding the cap on. Okay. Yeah. Trials us blind folk go through to open stuff. There we go. Wow, look at that great centering job. Dot right in the middle of that chip. Okay, the loop is rerouted, refilled, and rebled successfully this time. You can see that the same hose is taking fluid from the pump to the water block, and the hose going from the water block to the radiator is now going to the far port, whereas the near port here is returning straight back to the pump. The reservoir this time was used strictly for filling the loop and as a place for air to go as I was bleeding it. So that made bleeding it so much easier and no more gurgling. I also have the CPU installed under there. The water block is now fully assembled and the light is on. See a nice white square LED light around the hose ports. Unfortunately, the entire side panel is going to be solid metal, so that's not going to be visible. I'll be disconnecting the lights because there's no point in having them on. CPU power, motherboard, video card, water pump, hard drives, solid state drives, and radiator fans. Oh, and the fan controller. We're going to get that out of the way. We're not going to use this one. I have 6 fans on the radiator, and they all need to be used as CPU fans. The motherboard doesn't have 6 CPU fan headers, so that's where a fan controller comes in. This case has one built in, but I'm not using it because it only has 3 PWM connections, and I have 6 PWM fans. So I'll be using the Deep Cool 10-port fan controller. It'll be receiving the CPU fan signal with that cable, and I'll be powering it with a SATA connection. I will be mounting it down here at the bottom. Not all fans will reach though. Luckily, I do have a few extension cables for the fans, PWM extension cables, in my little spare parts box. There's the computer turned on for the first time. You can see I moved the L wire to the bottom of the case for a nice ground effect. I always have lighting in the intake vents in previous computers, so I thought it would be kind of nice to change it up a bit. There's my old studio workstation, big iron. I'll be keeping it in here for a few days while I copy over files and make it ready to be a dedicated IBM World Community Grid box. And this is my new studio workstation, Triton. I've named it after a Neptune moon, also a Greek demigod of the sea. I think it's appropriate given it's my first water-cooled computer. And now that I've got all the hardware completed, I am on to setting up that hardware and installing the operating system, programs, drivers, etc. to make it ready for use. EK ResX reservoir and water cooling. Reservoir and water cooling. It is for water cooling. Where's the brass? Okay. Stop recording. What I was going to put there is just disappeared. Over tightening a fitting at its best. The vice grip I had on this slipped and crushed the threading. Kind of made it hard to use after that.